These sidewalks, they hold our tears. Surely somebody will see our pain. One of these days, somebody has to care.
There are more people in slavery today than at any other time in human history. And that the conservative numbers tell us that it's a $150 billion a year industry, of which $99 billion is from sex trafficking and sexual exploitation of another human being.
I think in this day, most people by now have heard of human trafficking, that they're aware that this is something that's happening with us, but they simply aren't equipped with the skills to actually be able to identify it. Human trafficking is occurring out in the open on our streets. It looks like prostitution to our society, but really, if you dig into the stories behind why someone is out there doing that, you will always find force, fraud, or coercion. You'll always find sexual exploitation that began as a child.
One of the myths of trafficking is that, your kid is walking down the sidewalk, going to school or going to the corner market, and some vehicle pulls up next to them and grabs them and pulls them into the vehicle, and they drive off, and then they're like chained to a bed somewhere and trafficked, or they're taken out of the country. And that's really not what we see.
Pimps are people who try to gain control. And in the context of child sex trafficking, they seek out the vulnerability of a child. They will seek that vulnerability for one purpose, to exploit that vulnerability. And they will do that through the grooming process. Grooming is a process where someone ultimately is trying to gain control. So what they will do is they will target someone, then they will gain their trust, then they will meet a need of that individual. And once they've met that need, they will then help that person and try to convince that person and coerce that person and manipulate that person to think no one else can meet that need. And so they isolate them from anyone else. Once they're isolated, then that relationship typically becomes very sexual. And once the relationship becomes sexual, that person now has complete control. And so the grooming process really is this cultivation by a human being upon another human being. And in the context of child sex trafficking, our kids are very vulnerable to being groomed.
I was a runaway. I had been in and out of the juvenile justice system. I had been through sexual abuse. I had been through, a single parent household, moving a lot. I ended up in an abandoned house in the middle of the winter. I spent 5 days there, sleeping on the floor, just trying to figure out, how do I not get caught? And it was cold, and I was hungry, and I needed a shower, and I take off walking, and, this guy, he pulls up beside me, and his car was the heat from it was so warm. And he's like, you need a ride? And I'm like, sure, because all I could think about was that warmth, right? I mean, we think about those basic human needs. And those are things that are exploited by traffickers. They exploit vulnerabilities. My vulnerability was a runaway who was hungry, who was cold. This gentleman fed me. He washed my clothes. I took a shower. Although he wasn't the one that officially groomed me, this man kind of set a stage. As I was walking back to this abandoned house, a gentleman pulled up beside me and said, hey, you need a lift? I said, well, I'm looking for work. He's like, well, you're in luck. I can hire you. I can help you out. And he did have a job. He had a job selling flowers in bars and honky tonks. And all I had to do was go sell these flowers. But this started the grooming process. He gave me a safe place to live. He didn't ask me any questions. There was beautiful clothes and shoes and makeup and girly stuff everywhere. He taught me how to walk in high heels. I felt pretty. He told me I was beautiful. After a couple of weeks, he gave me an ID, and that ID had my fake name, and it said I was a grown-up. It said I was 19, so now I'm of age. So all I'm thinking in my 15-year-old mind is, I'm never gonna have to go home. This is awesome. And then, he started having me sell these same flowers in strip clubs, which is where he was, elevating the grooming process. He's still building a trusted relationship. Now he's normalizing, the strip club, the culture. Never once touched me. There was nothing inappropriate. I felt safe. And then he took me to lunch, told me he was going to be leaving, and introduced me to a gentleman and said that he wanted me to be looked after while I was gone because he cared about me. For $2,500, I would go home with this man, not knowing that I had just been sold to the man that owned several of those strip clubs I had been going in and selling flowers at. And that night he had to test the goods, and the goods were me. So now I'm being broken in and being, humiliated. The process, the degradation, the trauma, the fear. What do you do? Who was I gonna call? And the next day he throws me some clothes and says, get dressed. And he introduced me to my new job. And my new job was being bought and sold inside the VIP rooms of strip clubs in Oklahoma and Kansas. And then at 17, after just a lot of awful things happening, I'm escorted off the property at gunpoint. And a guy offered me a ride. He dropped me off in Kansas City, Missouri, where I spent the next 17 years being bought and sold.
There's probably no place more dangerous for kids in America today, and actually on a global scale, than unsupervised time online on a device with no adult around. We used to talk about stranger danger to kids in schools. We used to talk about being careful walking through the mall. Today, one of the greatest places of danger is in their online lives. One of the things that has happened in the year 2020 is that on a national level, we have seen the online enticement of children increase 98.66%. The reason for this is because kids are spending so much time online, and maybe we've got a kid who's feeling lonely, or maybe they're feeling isolated or depressed. And so they're expressing those things either in a gaming system or on social media or in a chat room somewhere. And there are people out there looking for these key words that a child will put online, and they will take that and they will then respond to that child. If a child is looking to communicate with someone online, it becomes very easy to draw them in that grooming process.
There's this notion that when someone is trafficked, it's because they're abducted. But really, our thinking about runaways versus abductions is an outdated concept, and that is because of the way that kids are groomed online. So many of these kids have had this online dialogue going with someone who is grooming them for weeks at a time. And the purpose of that is to gain their trust, to make them think that this is someone that is their friend. They want the in-person meeting. That is where the grooming process is leading to. And so what that looks like in the real world is it looks like this is a child who ran away. But really, they were brainwashed into this type of relationship. I've talked to people in the public about kids who are being trafficked, and I've had this question asked of me, well, are these runaways or were they abducted? And I think the reason why people are interested in that distinction is they're trying to figure out, are these bad kids? Do I need to care? Traffickers are aware of this distinction in the mind of the public between our sympathies. I'm aware of a story in which an older man was grooming a young girl for a long time and finally convinced her to an in-person meeting. He suggested that they meet at a popular gas station, which she did, and she thought, well, this is a very public place, it'll be very safe. And the entire reason why the trafficker suggested that they meet at this very public place was because he wanted her to be seen on camera willingly getting into his car. That way, she was not abducted. Do you see? She was a runaway. And that triggered an entirely different response as far as, would an Amber Alert be issued for her? Would law enforcement get moving after her right away? Or would there be more time?
I cannot drive it home enough. If there were not people willing to pay for people, traffickers wouldn't be exploiting, luring, enticing, manipulating our most vulnerable. If we didn't have buyers, we wouldn't have traffickers. And until we can address the demand, we're always going to have somebody willing to recruit our vulnerable and profit off of it. If you have 5 pimps and they have approximately 10 people that they are selling, and they've got to, say, make 20 dates in a 24-hour period of time to make their quota, right? That's 1,000 buyers of sex that's keeping 5 pimps in business.
At its core, we need to understand human trafficking, albeit in a very nefarious and dark and disturbing and criminal type of world. It is ultimately a business. And like any business, businesses that have a demand for their product thrive. And that is the reality of why human trafficking is occurring.
And the thing with people is they don't have to replace it, as we all know. You can sell a human being over and over, so that mitigates a little bit of their risk.
This is not, like the movie Pretty Woman. There are real humans here that are being exploited and abused and had violence put upon them, and some of them are being killed for sure.
There are sex sellers because there are sex buyers, and primarily and increasingly the product is a child. The reason the sex sellers or the pimps, the traffickers, the spotters are so bent on controlling children is because they are making so much money. They have completely dehumanized that child. They have created within that child a desensitization to the sexual acts that child is going to be forced to perform by showing them pornography, by helping them understand that this is what is normal activity when it absolutely is not. And so that child falls completely under the control. So the pimp wants control for one purpose: to make money. And they're making money, tragically, because demand to purchase kids for sexual purposes in America is so incredibly high.
Pornography is really the foundation of a lot of this. I mean, we can't blame it all on pornography, but a huge percentage of it has to start there. It desensitizes us to it. We're watching violence against women. We're watching men be able to do whatever they want with women, typically against their consent. Because you watch porn does not mean you're going to end up being, trafficking in minors. If you end up trafficking in minors, you probably started watching porn. The most searched term on Pornhub is very young girl. So you watch enough of that, you desensitize yourself to it, and what's the next step is just you going out to buy a very young girl.
I think with men, pornography is one of those things that seems so innocent, right? I'm not hurting anybody, is what we think. I think we'd be shocked at how many of those girls are victims, that we think are there on their own free will or even enjoying what they're doing. I think if that lens could zoom back and you could see before and after, I promise you that we would all view porn a lot different than we do.
In church, we say, don't watch porn. But it's an epidemic in our church everywhere. Porn is trafficking on camera. You have a trafficker, which is the producer who is profiting, right? You have a victim, which is the person being filmed. And you have a buyer, which is the demand. But it fuels men's desire to act out because it rewires the brain, sexual acts that they would never ask their loved ones to do. Thus, what do? They go pay for it to someone that they have no emotional attachment to.
What most people don't understand about pornography is that it is addictive like any other drug. Numerous brain scans and scientific studies have been done comparing the brain of someone addicted to cocaine or meth and comparing that same brain scan with someone addicted to pornography. And all the synapses in the brain are firing in the same way. Why is this happening? Well, because there's a dopamine release in the brain that happens when pornography is engaged with. The more dopamine release in the brain, the more addictive this becomes. And so what happens is that pornography becomes addictive like any other drug. It's an important thing to understand because a lot of people will try to shame someone out of a porn addiction. It's not going to be any more effective than you shaming someone out of a meth addiction or a cocaine addiction. It requires treatment with a level of compassion and yet firmness to say you may no longer continue in this very destructive behavior. So pornography functions like a drug, the way it behaves in the brain, and it is a dangerous drug. So I have kids come to me in assemblies, and I've had young kids as young as elementary age make statements similar to this. Using pornography makes me feel like my brain is on fire and that I'm about to lose control. They're not bad kids. There's an addiction that they are struggling with. What we find is that there is a draw through pornography that is creating within mostly men, but also some women, this almost uncontrollable urge to act out on their most depraved fantasies. The profile of the people who are purchasing them typically fits this. They have a sexual urge, but beyond that, it's about control. A lot of young victimized persons have told me that the people who bought them, it wasn't even about the sex, it was about control and manipulation and degradation.
Many buyers of sex have conditioned their brains to be aroused by acts of violence, sexualized violence. And these are things that they would not ask a partner or someone that they care about to perform. So they will purchase someone to act out these scenes of violence. This is why you will hear a lot of survivors of trafficking say that buyers came to them with scenes of pornography that they wanted to reenact.
So I worked Independence Avenue in Spruce, and there's a corner there. There's 3 churches, oddly enough, that not once reached out to help me. Not once. Are you safe? Are you hungry? I don't know how many times I had been beaten, strangled, drug across the parking lot unconscious by my pimp. I don't have enough fingers or toes. Nobody. There was a church that I would go to, that a lot of us would go to occasionally. We would wait until we couldn't stand it anymore, but we could go down there and get a meal if you made it there for the service, because you had to listen to the service, so there's a string attached, in order to get the food. And if you missed the service, you didn't get to eat. And they would just talk about how awful we were and that, we needed to, change our evil, wicked ways and that we were going to burn in hell. And I mean, we already knew we were a mess. My gosh, we were being raped and beaten daily. I mean, we didn't need somebody in their cars that were going to go home to the suburbs to tell us we were a mess. We needed somebody to give us compassion, make us feel safe, so that we could find enough hope to cling to. A lot of the women that were exploited and trafficked alongside of me would get in a car and never come back. And then we would see their pictures on the news, their bodies discarded as nobodies. They're the lowest of the totem pole to society, but yet they're in plain sight, being bought and sold every day. So it's like they're these invisibles that coexist with the rest of humanity. And they're in every city across our country. When you're surviving in every car you get in, you don't know if you're gonna make it back alive. You know, you develop a bond. And, Lycans Park, it's such a profound part of my story. We used to gather the steps. There was a bunch of us at one time, and we used to sit down there and have some of the craziest conversations. You know, Harlan, he was one of my best friends. Harlan always had honey buns, right? Even if he had to shoplift them. So if you could find Harlan, he was good for a honey bun. And, I remember sitting on them steps one day, and he's like, "You think God loves people like us?" It's like, I don't know. Society doesn't like us very much. I remember one day, I was so tired, and I had tried to go to treatment, and they gave me a wait list that was weeks out. And we were sitting there, and they were like, "Where you been?" And I was like, "I went to detox to try to go to treatment, but, I don't have insurance. They can't help me. It's going to be like forever before I can get in." And I remember saying, one of these days, there's going to be a place for people like us. Somebody's going to care about us. One of these days, surely. Rhonda used to dream. Marie, she wanted a yard and a family and a husband. Just all that normal stuff that everybody else wants. Penny was murdered, and then Rose was murdered, and Christy was murdered. Harlan was murdered in that park. Linda died of cancer trying to find hope to leave the streets. Marie was murdered and left for dead in the Missouri River. Rhonda, because of all the trauma, she tried to get clean and tried to leave the streets, and there weren't services that understood people like us, and she took her own life. I'll never forget broad daylight, standing on a corner, the truck turns down Independence Avenue and Spruce, and he smiles at me. He drives to the end of the block and flashes his brake light, so I know he's calling me on. So I walk down the street and I jump in the truck, and he smiles at me. When he takes me over to the railroad tracks off of Troost and parks the truck, and he comes around to the side of the truck and he pulls me out, and he beat me and he raped me and he beat me and he raped me and he beat me and he raped me like I had been through some stuff. I've been stabbed. I've been branded with a cattle iron. I've been hogtied. I've been held at gunpoint to dig my own shallow grave. I have been through some things, but I had never been beaten and raped in the way this man had assaulted me and violated me. He had finally stopped, and when he did, he had a gun. I was nodding in and out of consciousness. He had to pull my ponytail and kind of balance me on my knees. And he held that gun to my head, and he told me to give him a reason to let me live. And I closed my eyes, And I thought to myself, my prayers are being answered. It's finally over. Nobody's ever gonna hurt me again. Nobody's ever gonna pay for me again. It's over. And I waited for him to pull that trigger. And he didn't. I didn't understand the psychology about people like that yet, that they thrive on fear. I didn't have any fear. I learned many moons before that if you don't fight back, it won't hurt as bad and it won't last as long. When I realized he was gonna violate me all over again, I was full of rage for every one of my friends that had been murdered. For every time nobody asked me if you're okay. For every agency I asked for help and they said I wasn't worth it. I was so enraged, and I had a chance to get the gun, and I did, and the tables turned. And at that time, I pointed the gun at him, and I was shaking, and I looked him in the eye, and I saw his fear, and I questioned, had nobody saw mine? And I told him to get on his knees, and I told him to give me a reason to let him live. And he told me about his wife and his job. He told me about how valuable he was. And he sobbed. When I pulled that trigger that day, my intention was to murder that man. I believe that was God interceding on my behalf and gave me the strength to not take that life. Even though nobody wanted to help me, I knew I had the capacity to kill. I knew I had enough hate, and I didn't want to be the same monster I had experienced over the years. And I knew once that happened, there'd be no going back. And so I emptied the gun into the ground. I threw it. I gathered my clothes. I wiped the blood from my face. And that would begin my journey out.
I think historically, a lot of people say, why didn't she just get off the street? Or why didn't she get an ID and get a job? It is absolutely not that simple. But there's a lot of barriers for these girls to get out.
Getting them to a safe place where they can get away from their trafficker and they can get the food that they need because they're generally malnourished. They can get the medical attention that they need because they generally have a host of medical problems. Getting them the counseling and the therapy that they need because they generally have incurred, a lot of trauma bonding and trauma, both physically and emotionally, and work through whatever issues that they've had to where they can go out and do whatever it is that they wanted to do in life because they all had a dream to do something.
Law enforcement is a vital part of how we are going to eradicate trafficking. We simply cannot do it without them. But they cannot do it alone. They need a supportive community that knows how to identify trafficking, especially from key sectors like the trucking industry or hotels or schools. Our hospitals can be vital players and partners in this. Research says that approximately 80% of our trafficking victims at some point or another have passed through the doors of a hospital, and yet only 2% of them actually report and identify these people as victims. So we're missing big opportunities. Schools are also strategic partners because kids are the target. They're in schools in front of mandated reporters. And if we have our teachers and our counselors and the school resource officers and all of the caring adults that come around these children, if we have them educated, we can really make a difference. But those reports have to come in a timely and efficient way to law enforcement. And then law enforcement will need to call upon service providers. It isn't enough for them to run an operation and identify a number of victims. They have to have help available for them right away, or what else, the cycle will never stop.
There is no one person, no one agency, no one group that can tackle human trafficking by themselves. And when we first started doing human trafficking here in Missouri, one of the first things we realized was law enforcement was kind of in their little silo doing their little thing, and you had victim advocates kind of doing their thing, and then you had hospitals doing their thing, and everybody was kind of doing their thing, but nobody was like on the same page, not on the same team. And once we started building those relationships and getting everybody on the same team, there was a dramatic increase in the amount of good work that we were doing. And then once we started getting the community involved, that even increased more and more and more. And I think it's really, really imperative that everybody come together and do this. I mean, if we really want to save kids and we really want to stop trafficking, it can totally be done. It's not like we don't know how to do it. It's not like we have to do research or study or try to figure it out. We know how to do it. The thing is just getting everybody together.
In my opinion, I believe every industry should be trained in it. But I mean, if you're going to start with law enforcement, I believe firefighters, paramedics, nurses should be next in line. Hotel workers, restaurants, airline employees. I mean, I don't know that there's an industry that this doesn't touch. That was one of the reasons when we got started into this fight that I was super frustrated. I'd been a cop, a firefighter, I'd been a special operations soldier in the military. You know, lots of jobs that carried me all across this planet, and I had never once been trained in it. I think back now that I know what I know, all the years I spent as a fireman, all the calls I went on, all the houses I went into, all the car wrecks I worked in. And if I'd had that training back then, no telling how many other cases we could have found or how many girls we could have recovered.
Parents and communities that are being empowered and educated about this issue are finding one of the most important things is to talk to their kids at younger and younger ages. We're talking preschool and kindergarten, first, second grade. The conversation to have with your kids at that age is to help them understand the difference between a secret and a surprise. A surprise is a great thing. Grandma's coming over. It's your birthday, or you're getting a new birthday bicycle or whatever it might be. A secret, especially when it's online, is something that can often be very dangerous. The younger age that we start these conversations with our kids, the better off they're going to be once they get into older elementary, middle school, and high school to recognize the tactics that there are people out there that intend to harm kids. And I have to pay attention to what I'm doing online. For caring adults, just really quickly, some very practical suggestions. Don't live in fear over this issue, be wise. Give your kids boundaries. Set your own example on your online life. Some of you work a lot from home. Work really hard to put that phone down when your kid needs to talk, to look them in the eye and have the conversation. Get off of your own social media posting when your kid needs to talk to you. Put that device down, set a good example. And don't ever say this can't happen to my kid. Don't ever say that. Because some of the most tragic stories we are finding is with parents who are determined for whatever reason that their kid could not be impacted by this. And when parents disconnect and believe my kid can never fall for this, really difficult things are happening.
Fatherhood has affected me in this fight, absolutely. I have 2 daughters. The first thing that I try to do, and I try to get other men to understand, is you start in the home, so set a good example for your children in the way you talk to your wife, the way you treat your daughters. I mean, you have to start there to show them that respect. You need to educate them on it, let them know what it looks like. I mean, the world's largest brothel is probably in your daughter's pocket right now in her cell phone.
One of the strategies of the Stop Trafficking Project is something we call Be Alert. And so we go into communities and educate and empower adults first. Then we go do age-appropriate school presentations for students, kindergarten through 12th grade. We were recently in a rural community in a Kansas region. We got done with our student presentation to a group of middle schoolers, and at the end of the presentation, a young middle school girl approached us and said that she was in trouble. She allowed access to her devices, and because adults in the community had been properly trained the day and the evening before, they were ready to respond. And what happened was this girl was another story that is so common. She met a guy online she thought was her age. She began communicating. He began luring her in. They began the conversation. It went from bad to worse. Long story short, it became very real to law enforcement that she was a victim of domestic minor sex trafficking. Because of the bravery of this one girl in a single school in a rural community in Kansas, within a very short period of time, 3 more students in the same school also came forward with similar stories. The result of that is one day after we left that community from doing a school presentation, the very next day, a man was arrested and in jail on a $1.3 million bond. He was a product of that school community. He had grown up there, he had gone to school there, and he still lived in that same community close by to the school. It was a very empowering situation because what happened then was all the schools in the surrounding area became understanding the fact that this is a real thing. It's not just happening in exotic countries over there. This is happening to our kids right here. And so over the next 18 months, they brought our organization back into surrounding areas within that community because here's the thing, an exploiter like that never only has one kid that they're exploiting. They always have multiple kids that they are grooming and that they're looking to exploit their vulnerabilities. This enormous, complex, despicable crime of sex trafficking of children can be broken down into 3 words. It's about the exploitation of vulnerability. So for the kid that you care about, identify the vulnerability in their life, and then realize this, anything and everything I do to lessen that vulnerability before it becomes exploited is collectively working together to combat the crime of sex trafficking of children. And by doing this, we can be alert together. We're being active, we are learning, we are empowered, we are relentless, and we're together.
Back in the 90s, we used to have a drop-in center in downtown, and it was in the middle of the summer. My pimp at the time, it was daylight. I'd been working all day. And it was in the summer and I was so hot and I was just tired and I was hungry, but I needed a drink of water. My ears were ringing. I was dehydrated. I hadn't eaten in days. And I was begging him. I pleaded with him and said, please just let me walk across the street and use that water hose for a drink of water. And he hit me and I was on the ground and I was on my knees. Please don't make me get in that car. Just let me have a drink of water first. And he said, no. I got in the car and I came back and got in another car and came back and got in another car. And when I came back, he was gone. And so I started walking down to the drop-in center. And by now I've got bruises on me from where he had hit me because all I wanted was a drink of water. And Jeannie was in there. She always called me baby girl, and she's like, why don't you come in my office? And I'm like, I just need to rest. She grabbed her clipboard. She closed the blinds. I said, may I sit? And she was standing by the door, and she turned out the light. And she says, baby girl, I'm gonna go out in the lobby and do my work today. You can rest. I'll wake you up when it's time for me to leave. So about 4:35, she came and woke me up, and I was still tired. Went in the bathroom and washed my face and walked out the door, and there were people waiting for me. I'll never forget the tears that streamed down her face. She gave me so much love and compassion in that simple act of just meeting me where I was at. It was just sleeping on the floor in her office. That's all it was. But I cling to that. Sometimes she would be driving down the street in the winter. She'd be like, just get in the car and warm up. She was meeting me where I was at, but she was also building trust.
The RPOR Drop-In Center is a place for vulnerable women to come in and get off the street. No expectations, it's just a safe place. They can come in, we offer them hot food, an outfit, a shower, place to take a nap. If they want resources, we'll refer them. Absolutely no expectations. We just want them to have a safe place to come where we can build a relationship with them so that, 5 years, 5 days, 5 months, whenever they do make the decision to try to get off the streets and make better decisions, we want to be the people they come to for help. Second weekend we were open, it's when it really hit me that I knew we were doing the right thing. One of the girls came in, looked disheveled, hair all messed up, probably hadn't eaten in a week. She sat down and didn't want to say anything, so we kind of left her alone. She started asking for Gatorades. We fed her 3 or 4 Gatorades, a couple slices of pizza. Within about an hour, she's kind of starting to liven up a little bit, ask if she can use the bathroom. We pick her out an outfit. She goes in there, cleans up, comes out, and the smile that was on her face when she walked out of that, I knew immediately that we were on the right track. Even if it's just temporary, right? I mean, she came in and for 2 or 3 hours, we hung out with her. We got her cleaned up, but from the way she walked in to the way she walked out of our doors makes everything that we're doing absolutely worth it.
None of us have an excuse to not do something about it. Figuring out a way through your kids' elementary school, middle school, high school, on getting this in front of students, the urgency of understanding, the dangers of social media. There's not a shelter out there that is dedicated to the exploitation of women that is just doing phenomenal financially and, doesn't need any resources. When you see that girl on the side of the street that you may think is a prostitute because of the way she's acting or what she's wearing, I'd say let's all remember that one, they're children of God, and know that there's probably something going on there that is not what it seems. Go by and grab a Subway sandwich and drop it off there and introduce yourself. You'll be amazed that by treating them this way, it's likely something they've never experienced with a man actually caring for them and not wanting something in return.
This is a community problem, and it's something that I believe very strongly everyone has something to offer. I really encourage people to take a moment and look around you, around your community, at those who are already doing this work and doing it well, and get behind and support their efforts to not create something new and duplicate efforts, but get behind those that are already in this field doing this work. It is a solvable problem.
I absolutely believe there's hope, because I see communities rising up. We have been honored and blessed and humbled to go into several communities around these states and bring in the Be Alert strategy, where we encourage individuals and communities to be active, learning, empowered, relentless together. And we see people rising up to that challenge. What we do is we go in and we educate and empower the adults in the community about the reality of what domestic minor sex trafficking is and how it actually works. We combat the myth that a white van pulls up on a street, grabs a kid, and throws them in a basement where they're tied up to a radiator being sold for profit. That's not how it's happening most of the time. Primarily, we're dealing with the issue online. So we go into schools after educating and empowering the adults, and we talk to students in fun, upbeat ways. And what's amazing is to see adults in the community rise up to say, we've got to take care of our kids. And we see the kids rise up to go, we don't want to be targeted for this. We're going to make some changes. So let me just address men who are struggling with a porn addiction. Number one, I'm not coming to offer a message of shame, but I am coming to you as a velvet-wrapped brick to get your attention. I understand the dopamine released in the brain may be impacting you to ways that you feel like you cannot control. I want this to be motivation for you. Every click you use on pornography, you are contributing to the crime of sex trafficking. I don't want you to think that no one else is being harmed because you're just viewing something on a screen and no one you think in your relationship is being harmed. I want you to understand every single click you are contributing financially, even though you're not paying anything. The way the algorithms of pornography work, they are making money off of your clicks. You are contributing to a child, and maybe you're a dad who has a daughter of your own. I want you to stop and think the impact that you are having. And I want to appeal to the hero in you as a man. I want to appeal to good men to be better. And we need good men to step up and be authentic with the boys in their life that they have influence with to help them understand this reality. The pornography industry is on purpose targeting, baiting, and trapping boys and girls at younger and younger ages. We need men to step up and take this issue on with a serious purpose and with an intention to end it before it starts.
I believe wholeheartedly that if we do for one, what we wish we could do for money. Together, united, we can change our community and in turn change our world. We heard how big of an issue this is. I mean, we have 27 different types of trafficking. It's huge and it's massive, but we can't use that as an excuse to do nothing. Because each of us can do something.
Once I was interviewing this survivor, and she was explaining her past relationship with law enforcement. And historically, she'd had some negative experiences with law enforcement, arresting her for prostitution, arresting her for drugs, things of that nature. And no one ever really asked if they could help her, or if what was wrong, or if there was anything they could do, because they just didn't know. Law enforcement didn't know. We were not trained. We did not know. But when I asked her, what's your take on law enforcement now? And she's like, I love law enforcement. I'm a big supporter of law enforcement. And I said, really, why is that? And she says, because of all the officers that I met that arrested me and didn't take the time to try to, ask me if I needed help, there was one that did. And that one was the one that got me out of that life. That one was the one that allowed me to get my life together. That one was allowed me to be a mom someday. That one was allowed me to get a job and to have a place to live and have a completely different life. And she said, so why wouldn't I be a fan of law enforcement? Because it only takes one. You be that one. You be that one that's gonna make a difference in somebody's life, that's gonna save somebody's life, that's going to allow them to be a mother or a husband. If everybody is just the one, think of the difference that we could make.
Many of my friends died without ever finding a pathway out, finding hope, ever having a chance to flourish, to dream. And for them, I will continue to rise and help people understand this issue. I pray you choose to rise with all of us today.
Hi, my name is Anita Cordell, and I'm an actress, producer, and director. They say that you should film what you know, and at the time I had 3 foster kids in my home. They were long-term placements, and I had 3 of my own children in my home. So I had 6 kids in my house at the time, and I would start learning stories about what was going on in the fostering system here in the Midwest, especially Kansas City. And what I was finding out and discovering was stories about sexual content and sexual abuse. And so I was working with a director here in the Midwest, started telling him some things that I was learning and how my eyes were kind of opened up to the horrors of what was going on in the fostering system. And we started developing a story that was centering around the truth of sexual abuse in our fostering system. And the more that I started learning about it, the more my whole entire world was shifted. And I became scared at first. I became scared that my family could somehow be affected by it in a negative fashion. At first, did not know how I could help, how just a person who is not on the streets, I have no law enforcement training, I have no hands-on experience about this situation, how I could help with combating this and help educate the community at large on this horrific industry. About 1 month prior to the cameras being rolled, I was at church one day and Chris Tomlin's song called I Will Rise was being shared with the worship team. All I could hear at one point was the words, I will rise. It was almost like my ears were shut and those words of the song just kept rolling in my head. And I even opened up my eyes and I looked around to the people to my left and to my right, and their mouths were actually moving a little bit differently than what my ears were hearing. It was just one of those kind of God moments that you just know something is happening inside your heart. And I felt like God was saying to me, name your nonprofit, I Will Rise, and I will tell you why later. It was dropped into my spirit and my soul, 3 different people who will be affected by the films that I create underneath of this nonprofit. The first group of people are going to be those who are victimized, those who are on the streets maybe, those who feel hopeless, those who feel like they can't get out of their situation. They will feel a sense of hope after seeing that there's other people out there caring, and they will have a sense of confidence inside of them. And I believe that they will see the films that I do and the work that people are doing out in the community, and they will say in their hearts, I will rise up out of this industry. I can do this. I can rise up out of my pain. I can get better. The second group of people are the pimps and the Johns, the drug dealers, those people who are contributing to the negative impact of this industry. I believe that they will see the short films that I do, this documentary, maybe even future feature films, and also the impact of my friends and what they will be doing in this community. And they will see it and they will be convicted in their heart, and they will say, I will rise up out of this industry. And the third group of people are the community at large, the churches around us, the friends that we have, those people who will see other people rising up, and they will then too say, I will rise up with these people and help. And that's the goal of I Will Rise, is to make sure that we implore and educate the community at large to understand what is going on in this horrific industry, to see how it impacts the culture around us, to see how it impacts even the children right down the streets from us, and just to see how it affects all of us at large, and implore and encourage the community at large. That is you, and that is your neighbor, that is your family members, all of us, no matter what our giftings are, no matter what we have an expertise in, no matter what our field of industry is, we all can rise up and do something to make change.
I will rise.
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 I will rise.